I'm really, really happy to be with a group of individuals who are really inspiring. And this whole process started a little while ago over lockdown, thanks to British Council. So I'll say that right at the start. But this was began life as a project between No Bounds Festival and Yes No Wave Music, and it was the idea of doing a cultural exchange between UK and Southeast Asia, a meaningful cultural exchange that explores each area's cultures and artists. And so we basically set up a project and we invited the absolutely wonderful Nkisi and the wonderful Gabber Modus Operandi, yes, absolute faves of mine, and you know, and Wok as well. And basically we wanted to task these beautiful individuals with the idea of creating some kind of an exchange between themselves that explored various ideas that were pertinent to them as artists and that were pertinent to this project. And this quickly developed into something that went far deeper than we ever expected. And it's just turned into this beautifully deep and twisting project that's exploring all kinds of themes, roughly centered around issues of decolonisation, decentralisation, the global south, and exploring different ways of communicating and interacting between each other. And it kind of blossomed into something that's more like an Afro-Asian project in the way that it's outputted. I'm not going to labour on what this all is because this is for them to discuss. The purpose of this talk is to talk about what we've been working on or what they've been working on. And myself and Wok have been just helping happen. And we've brought in the fabulous Lupini to moderate this session. Melodic Distraction's very own Lupini, and a fabulous person and artist in her own right. So Lupini will be moderating, and this was supposed to be like a 2-hour session. Let's see how we go with this now. If everyone out there, if you can still stick with us, that'll be amazing. I know we're an hour behind now, but we've got lots to talk about and lots to discuss, and we hope you can stick with us. If this session is going to be roughly about a talk with Gabber Modus Operandi and Nkisi, who are going to explain their process. You will have an opportunity to have some questions. So there'll be a short Q&A session, and then I'm going to hand you over to Yes No Waves, Wok the Rock, to finish off. So at this point, I'm going to sign off, stop talking, and let the really interesting stuff happen. And I'm going to hand you over to Lupini, Nkisi, and Gabber Modus Operandi. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Hello, everyone. Yes. Super. Hi. Delighted to be here. We made it. Yes. So I'm Lupini, and I'm going to be just prompting and starting the conversation going between the wonderful Nkisi and Gabber Modus Operandi. And we've got loads of ground to cover, loads of topics to discuss. If you have any questions as we go along, put them in the Facebook chat, and we'll try and keep an eye, and we'll do a bit of a Q&A with everybody later. But to give a little bit of an outline of quite where we're at and just some kind of thoughts and some things to get us going in this discussion. This whole project has come about as a under the working title Augmented Mythology, Reincarnation of the Rhythm, which is a collaborative sound and visual experiment between Gabber Modus Operandi and Nkisi as part of an association between No Bounds and Yes No Wave. And as far as I know, and I'm about to probably be corrected by these wonderful and talented folks, this is a project, and the things that we're operating under here is a new creative mythology based on ideas of a future society that has bypassed Western imperialist dominance, an alternative future arrived at from a story where the rise of the West never happened. So we're looking at an Afro-Asian reality that has grown and flourished in parallel, where the societal, the cultural, and the political global structure and completely alternative power balance is a result of this. And the questions that this is looking to set up and ask is that how can we access this place? How can we access this space, this dimension? And Nkisi and Gabber Modus Operandi are the tools. They are the mediums and the pathway. It's a ritualistic musical performance that connects the individuals who are listening and participating to the spirits with this created world. And we're going to be reincarnated through rhythm and through melody if the lot of us can generate enough power to get there. So a lot of themes at play, things we wanted to talk about. Oh, wow. Technology, music, mythology, colonialism, decolonializing music and technology, reconnecting with folklore in digital spaces, and how the digital can provide room for transcendence. Wow. Okay, we're going to get going on it. I am going to just pass the baton now to both Nkisi and Gabber Modus Operandi to say, how did this project come about? We'll do the kind of perfunctory stuff. How did this project come about? How did you get to know each other? How did you find working on this project collaboratively? And then let's dive into the nitty gritty of some of these topics. Malika, do you want to take the floor first?
Okay, hi everyone. Yeah, I think I met Gabber Modus Operandi when we were still touring, etc., in Australia. I think it was 2019. I don't remember. Which was really nice to meet them. I've always been a fan of their music. So when Liam was reached out to be part of this project, I was really excited. I think without going too much too deep in little details, I think for me what was really interesting was to kind of really think about the conversations of both of our practices and how they kind of were similar in the place that we were both kind of touching on to ancient traditions, but thinking about them in another way, in a more scientific and futuristic way than in this idea of primitive cultures or cultures who haven't reached modernity yet. For me, it's been very interesting because obviously I didn't know so much about Indonesian culture and the gamelan tuning system, so it was really nice to kind of get to know more about these things. But I think really what was really interesting was to really start thinking about how a lot of times it's difficult to even explain things, certainly things like music in context of paradigm, because sometimes we're kind of asked to kind of explain things in a way that still enters this dominant way of thinking about even what music is and how music can exist and how music is performed and how music is experienced. So then I think the concept of focusing on this mythology or focusing on this other way of connecting to something outside of what we're used to became a really interesting way to kind of use as a method much more than to just think about the end product. I felt it was more about the process, which I thought was really great. Yeah.
I guess there's an irony about the very fact of institutionalizing something like this, which is a project about the lived experience in the moment, and also having to have it mediated through digital space. Obviously, with the last 14 months that we've all had, it's been for you folks as well, hyper digitized. I want to ask Gabber Modus Operandi, Chan, if you have any words to say on how you found coming to the project initially and your first thoughts on all of this.
Well, I think there is a moment when we have a tour together, when we play together in Australia, was when Malika said to us in the backstage after we played, "What is that?" And then me, well, this and Malika said "Whoa, we never found that kind of." I don't remember, but she's doing this yeah, that's kind of for us to back in the day, Malika didn't play yet. Malika is playing after us, and after that, when you said what is that, and after that you play, and of course we watching you as what is that? Of course, in the same question, from this kind of connection of questioning what you deliver to us, and also me get the same energy when Malika is presenting her works. It was there is something in this kind of energy we actually realize we speaking in the same language,
or not,
or not at all. I mean, like
but no, but yeah, I mean, the beauty of this is like both of us try to connect with whatever people call it now, like culture, and what we have for sure is technology. So the idea that we bring this kind of stuff, and she bring that kind of stuff, and with the full LED, and then smoke, and then dark room, which is like it's kind of perfect idea that there is this more like effort, you know, like the beauty is this is the process, like both of us not really, I mean, at least from Gabber Modus Operandi, we can say like we don't really know what we're doing actually, but we want to go in this kind of way, you know, because it's really hard for us and for her maybe to defining the music that kind of not really fitting the narrative, you know. It's like for us simple, like hey, you guys doing this pentatonic, yeah? Yeah, but I mean, it's hard to explain the stuff that is actually really familiar around you in your home. You know,
yeah.
it's
So
like, and then you kind of stuck with this like a tourist guide, like yeah, this from the back, like it's beautiful, welcome to Indonesia, you know. But it's so boring. But, you know, and then in the same time, like after the show, we kind of catch up, and then I think we end up to like after party, right, Malaika, and then and everyone is drunk. But like it's beautiful to talk about like there is more than just like
hedonism in the club culture,
in the club culture. Yeah. It's not just like
but like I mean, like that's the first like impression, and then when we have a news like Yes, No Wave, and No Bound like presenting us together, and we're like, what? Nkisi, what? Like that's like kind of like moment like me and Cass is just kind of, what the fuck, man? We're gonna collaborate with Nkisi. It was like shit, you know, and that's kind of excitement. Even like we actually doesn't know what to do. Yeah. Like of course, like what we gonna collaborating with Nkisi. I mean, like what? I mean, like this is kind of exciting because we just met like.
Until now, we don't know what to do. Actually.
Exactly.
Like,
I mean,
it's just like it's really nice because like to be honest, like the text that you say is like really good. Like it's like, wow, that's such a good opening. But yeah, like for us, it's more like we want to make it like as natural as possible. It's starting with more like admiration, like a respect, and then. And the stuff that we have, which is ironically, it's all digital. Like that's also the best part out of it. Like we do this thing via Zoom and then internet, and then we all have vaccine and we all have 5G powers, things like that. But anyway, yeah, I mean, the starting point of this project was pure admiration of her works and the projection of how it's gonna go forward from this point. You know?
I think it's good to touch on that in actual fact your processes do seem to have this like beautifully like in sync energy. Like you're both, I mean, forgive me for speaking for you, but but you're both approaching a lot of the same themes, and you're using the prism of like fast, hard music to reach something transcendental, it feels like, with both of you. But to look a little moment at where things are slightly different, if we were to like kind of sort of divide this project down the middle and look at kind of the two spheres of influence that you bring, I kind of wanted to touch a little bit, Nkisi, about your use of rhythm, because when there's a little bit of preamble about this project, a lot of the focus of your previous studies about how this piece came to be, but also in your other works, rhythm is really an essential core building block. And then from Gabber Modus Operandi's side, your work with melody and tunings. And then when you bring the themes of like technology, folklore, accessing like ancestral wisdom through a prism of hard, fast music, but then you have these two streams coming into it. I think that's an interesting little intersection to explore. And both of you are working at how to decolonialize or just take a non-Western view of these two elements as well. So could we run through a little bit of everybody's work in turn with those things? Because I think they speak so strongly about the musical backgrounds that you both have and what you've brought to this project. So, I mean, we started, Nkisi, with you before. Do you want to start again on this one about your work with rhythm?
Yes, yes, it's fine. I think for me, and it's been very interesting because I guess like through the lockdown and Corona, I went through different stages of myself, you know, having to kind of like connect to myself. And I think now actually, which is really interesting that Gabber Modus kind of mentioned this idea of not knowing, because that's always been kind of the thing that has like forced me to do the things that I do, because I've always felt like if I feel like I know something, then it means that it's like something that's conditioned, and that's like a knowledge that has been forced on me. So it's always kind of like breaking out of like what I know and what I'm conditioned to think that I know. And I think there's also the most beautiful thing is to kind of like discover and uncover things about yourself through just the acceptance that you don't know anything. So then connecting to rhythm, I think what interests me the most is this idea of like, again, how can we disconnect with this brain? How can we disconnect of like rationality? And I've been obviously going through my own initiation and doing more research about what it means initiation. One part of initiation is always to, you know, have this like very ecstatic dance that's connected to like an ecstatic rhythm, in a way also to kind of like be able to reach the kind of knowledge that's already embedded in yourself. And then, which is also like really interesting with this idea of like reincarnation of the rhythm, where it's like, you know, if we think that like, and definitely like the traditions that I'm from, we think a lot about this idea of like, you know, that we reincarnate in like different bodies. So then it becomes really interesting that maybe like rhythm becomes a way to kind of connect to our other lives, like other dimensions, higher dimensions. And I don't know, maybe my kind of obsession with rhythm is also a bit a way to kind of like run away from this fucked up world. I think it also has like that dimension of like, how can I put myself into a trance, and how this idea of like collective trance can maybe like shift the holographic matrix reality that we're in, and maybe we can find ourselves somewhere else. So I think a lot of that is like connected to that. But then I think for me, it's like important also, obviously, to have this research side where it's like, okay, I'm researching, but then I also always have to question what I research, because obviously, when I go into the research of the rhythms, etc., a lot of times what you will find is like the kind of like ethnomusicologist way of looking at rhythm. But then, is that also the way, you know, am I bringing the work again into the context of a colonial setting, or am I actually really connecting with something outside of it? So then I think for me it becomes I'm really connecting with my own intuition, but then also in like creating this kind of like, you know, a lot of times before I start making music, I would just like kind of envision or just like visualize like, oh, what is the story of this track, or like what is the story of this, like kind of really already creating the world in my mind, in my mental space, and then the music like materializing. So I think what was really interesting for me in this collaboration was really to think about how to also be, again, like what Gabber Modus said, like be natural with it, don't force it too much, but also understand that like there's always, and certainly I guess for me more maybe than them, just being at this side of the world, being, you know, actually living in Europe, you know, we always, a lot of times I also have to do this work of like unconditioning myself, of like going back to these kind of forms of like trying to make, you know, my work understandable and readable. So I think this idea of also turning things weird, turning things outside of the rational, I think that's already a good method to really think about how we can kind of propose something that can just transcend what's already been around, you know?
Yeah. Wow, there's a lot to actually touch on there. This is kind of like almost branching into other themes to bring on that we were going to bring up later. Maybe if we like just stick with that for just a moment. Folks from Gabber Modus Operandi, I'm not going to leave you out. We are going to touch on melody and tunings, but to pick up on that thread there, because Nkisi, you mentioned so much about, yeah, so for a start, the trance induction by drumming, I feel like is a theme that has come up in your work again, but it's so interesting you mentioned that tension between not wanting to make something like too scientific and also like accessing your intuition, but having that research basis around it. And it's a tough place to reach, right? It sounds like you've gone in with loads of research and a lot of like scholarship and grounding, and then because you've got this foundation, you're able to kind of like tap into that state that you're reaching something sort of purely and directly, and you're tapping into a source almost to find these rhythms, and they're like both the channel and the way by which you get back to your center. And yeah, without meaning to, as you mentioned, like the problems associated with like purely making things sort of like ethnomusicology, but the way that you're talking about like using drum patterns to trace back to your lineage, or like use those particular rhythms to access older wells of knowledge. I mean, I know that in previous works you've spoken about specifically like Congolese rhythms, or worked with Congolese rhythms, and then of course this has a trace back, doesn't it? I mean, that is directly transmitted, it comes through to the Caribbean, and it then goes on to America, and we come like full circle. So there's like both a very practical like retracing the steps of rhythm, but then as you also said, like just going deep into that intuition and finding it there. Yes, there's so much to unpack. There's so much to unpack there. I don't know if you want to hover a little more on that space before we go on to melody.
Yeah, maybe I'll say just like a last little thing, because I think it's also really important, and even in my just, I guess, like more spiritual and research connecting to like my initiation, was also to realize that, you know, in ethnomusicologists, they say like, oh, the drumming was kind of like used to communicate with like other villages or etc. But then you realize when you go deep into these traditions that they are really, really like, that they were so good in like things like telepathic communication and things like, you know, astral projection and stuff. So then you're like, okay, why would they play rhythm to kind of just communicate with like another village? And then you realize the communication actually is between the visible and the invisible world. Then it becomes also really interesting, because I think, again, with this idea of like, you know, trying to connect also my own personal narrative, it becomes like, how can I put myself in trance for myself to be able to reach higher dimensions and maybe come back with some information, you know? So then it becomes like this really interesting thing where you start realizing that the fact that like hip hop has these rhythms involved in them, like a lot of like diasporic rhythms that we listen to, that it's actually social contracts that we make with the invisible world. And why that it's like, you know, a lot of like the drum rhythms were there for, you know, for revolution, you know, why is music always like the first thing that brings people together? Then you start realizing that even if we disconnect this idea that for me, maybe it's Congo heritage, that just music has this power to basically connect with this higher realm, because everything is sound, we're all vibration. You know, the only thing, I see everyone just because my eyes decode the vibration into, you know, like images and colors and words. So then it becomes really interesting to think that like actually when we make music, we actually connect to, you know, we make contracts with, you know, higher dimensions. And then it becomes like interesting what the power lays into what we can do. So that's like why I think it's really good to then also have this place where it becomes like, you know, we don't really know what is what anymore, and we're stepping away from this like compartmentalization and putting things in boxes. Actually just making stuff that's just sick.
Sometimes it's mad that the more you think about the sort of like this quote unquote, as a very Western term, the sort of scientific ramifications of like frequency and vibrations, the more you start to think about it, actually the more fantastical and harder it becomes to explain, until you just go that it's a question about accessing a state of mind or a state of being, or a place that is in the here but not necessarily like physically here. Wow. I mean, thinking about vibration then is probably quite a neat segue to bring us over to open the floor to Gabber Modus Operandi to have a little word about melody and tunings, because thinking about vibrations, especially with, you know, traditionally like metallophones or things that vibrate together. Let's pass over to you folks to explain how you brought melody into this project and about some of your thoughts about how melody can function in a decolonial setting. I know that sounds like a very formal question. You folks explain it better than me. Do you want to take the floor?
It's heavy.
Yeah, I know.
Oh yeah, I mean, when we start this project, I mean, like previously as Gabber Modus Operandi, it's always start from like
our fascinating with the melody surround us. Of course, most of Indonesian music it's based on melody.
Yeah, and then like when both of us not music educated, doesn't have any background of music, so we just kind of wondering and then sharing things with Instagram. And in the end, one of the particular thing that we found out that there is no room. We talk about the space. Most of the music was played in the outdoors since we granted by the tropical climate. It's like everything that's travel really fast, like a melody, all this melody, like I'm talking like a gamelan and then serunai or the flute or this like all the high pitching stuff.
Yeah.
And then when when we got approached this project, and in the same time that both of us kind of start to really, it's interestingly like Kayam Alami, am I saying right?
Yeah,
making this like the tuning things, which is like we're really into it. Like before we just playing with the scales. Now after Kiam making that presentation and then that tools and I think like 4 months before I was searching all the tuning, the gamelan tuning, and I found out that 166
wow.
files of covered gamelan tuning, just gamelan.
This archive, where do you get?
Surprisingly, it's from some Norwegian website.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the interesting fact. The interesting fact, there is a chaotic ideas about where this tuning goes. Like most of this, like one of my favorite stuff is there is this thing called sekati, S-E-K-A-T-I. This gamelan was like super sacred from Jogja that only can be played in the before full moon or after full moon.
Okay.
And then and in the other hand, we're really close with one of our favorite composer. Like we want to know the story and the background of gamelan also. And one of my favorite composer called Dewa Alit saying is like, it's a sound. It's the system that makes it gamelan. Like the ensemble, of course, the way people playing it, with a huge number and make a certain collaboration that makes it gamelan. But to go back to sekati, this tuning is only like 167 bytes in the file size. Can you imagine the gamelan that played by at least 30 people, only for royal family in the kingdom, before the full moon, super sacred, and then converted into 168 bytes of .stl files, which is blew our mind. It's just like, it doesn't make sense, you know? And when we tried on the synth, it's kind of worked. It's like, it's pretty close. Well, you know,
as a melodies is the powerful of this tuning. It's for us is reopen like the possibility of, well, if this injected in the synth, this could be like another things to presenting in the club.
Yeah, because I mean, both of us doing this stuff not because of the music. I don't think like when we start Gabber Modus Operandi, it's more about like we are so bored with how people dance, how people dance to like all the same, you know. Like in Bali, you have like amazing gamelan, amazing dancer, and then you go to the club, it's just all this like
The boiler room dancer,
you know. I don't say it.
That's why like everyone's in around Indonesia is like they're dancing exactly what like a boiler room did.
But in the same time, when you cross-checking with TikTok, people dancing like amazing because they can dance the way they want, and we stop complaining about like why, but we rather like let's make music that
exactly
so, like calling them to dance like this, you know, even it's speculative music.
Yeah, and the formula to connect with the dance, it's through the melody. If it is with us, you know, our first party was like using the melody as a perspective to us to calling the people.
So yeah, and to reach the idea of and also the interesting fact that not fact, it's just part of our conversation that it's just the idea of trance itself that's a bit westernized. Like trance gonna give you some meaningful or like bigger spectrum, but in the some case that we found out that it's really personal. Like I don't know if you check our video Dosa Besar, that's actually about the most of the trends in Indonesia. That most of them gonna replicate the idea of the animal, like the tiger, the snake, and the bird. None of them become giraffe or polar bear because
sure,
it's funny.
It is funny
because when I talk to a couple of them of the idea of trans, they just like manifest the idea of what kind of fauna that live around them, and what kind of like what possess the symbols of like being strong, being fierce, being whatever, you know. So the idea of trans also really grounded to the space.
Yeah.
I don't know. We never experimenting it, but I don't know if we are diaspora, let's say, and we live in Canada, are we gonna possess grizzly bear
or moose?
I don't know, but
right.
it's interesting that this kind of fact of the idea of trance itself with the set of melody, it's gonna trigger this kind of condition, right? Sure. This kind of condition, like we even have this thing called aing macan, aing maung, right?
Right.
Like one of the top game, if you are in the trance ideas, at least in the dance, you're gonna become a tiger. It's like as beauty as a Sumatran tiger. You're gonna be like suddenly you become like tiger in the dance floor or whatever, and it's so submissive for us when we see it. It makes us jealous. It's like how can you submit to the sounds around you and then to the space and then just like own it like a tiger, which is like it's beautiful.
Yeah, you raise a really interesting point about trance states. It's not a sort of like one size fits all and that there's like trance that everybody accesses from all over the world. It's modulated from where you are and your own background and where you're raised. And it's a social state. It's a cooperative state. It's a group ecstasy. It's not just something that you access. So you're saying that trance states that people are accessing in what you're trying to push when, or you're drawing on those threads of like trying to push them to be certain animals. There's also a kind of like a mask wearing to it. There's taking on an identity that you've kind of picked out and chosen, and there's something that's in dialogue about what you're doing. I remember when we were pulling up some notes for this, one of the things that sprung to mind is about something called mirror neurons, which is that you watch somebody dancing and all the neurons firing in your own head replicate somebody else dancing. So even without joining them physically, mentally, your body is there and like it wants you to be part of it. It's this group rhythm. I think that's just something that really sprung up when we were talking about that. I think wanting to access those states is something that is totally common to your both of your music, but is also common to this project. And it's interesting you kind of picked up on certain animals. So you said like monkey, tiger, they don't become giraffes or grizzly bears. But in this project as well, you've picked certain like mythological creatures and totemic items. Is there a link there? Because I don't, this isn't a leading question, I don't actually know the answer. Is there a link between these kind of characters and the characters that you've chosen to use in this project?
Yeah, I think whenever we introduce each other through Nkisi and this before this project, also like the way we're getting closer. And Nkisi said it's also like Malika said, it's Nkisi itself. It's actually like a sculpture, like a jimat. What's it called? What's the English for jimat? Yeah, I mean, like it's kind of like sacred sculpture. You can like do like, you know, like this sculpture can like become a medicine. This sculpture also, you know, like there's kind of like many story behind it. Because actually it's kind of similar what we did in Sumatra. Like and we talk about like how, well, if a form is a totem, it's really interesting how we also have in here, especially from my background is coming from Sumatra. We have this kind of sculpture also, like similar with like what Nkisi also actually have, and also like similar narration always, like, you know, like this totem was sacred and you should like doing ritual with them, and then like also like can be like, you know, good for you, medicating you. That's kind of narration, you know, like that's why like the totem itself is the visualization. I mean, like, well, for me and for us, it's the way, I mean, like this is the way, like whenever we say it about the mythology before with Nkisi, and suddenly we agree about like why we not just make our own myth with this project. I mean, like we can, I mean, like our or our heritage, our it's been located in Netherlands in some museum, in British museum, wasn't exist here. So why we not just like creating our own mythology based on this our project? So that's why like that's kind of the visualizations coming up.
So Walker's just put, for people watching on Facebook, Walker's just put a link in the chat to a little bit more information about what Nkisi is. If you want to go and look at it, feel free to have a little look, bring us up in another tab. Yeah, I think that question about physicality, like with, as you're saying, so parts of these both cultures like drawn, like the physical object has a power, and it has a healing power, and it has a spiritual power, and a power of connection. So when you've made your own ones and you've made them digital, they still have power. So is it the physicality? It's that's what I'm so interested in. It's like that digital space can still be the holding place for a physical one. I don't know if that's a really difficult topic to draw out.
I think what it's really interesting is to think about consciousness, you know, and like what it means to, you know, to what do we define as, you know, like if you see something, if you see a body, you see my body, you see the body of the Nkisi, you see the body of like, you know, of like a virtual. So I think it's more, which for me then comes to the point of like energy, which I think it's really, really interesting to think also about that and how energy actually travels. Because I've been basically already in like, or I've seen kind of like trance sessions where people manage to get in trance through Zoom, where like, you know, I would maybe play some rhythms and you guys from the other side would be able to get into trance too. So it's also this idea of just like, you know, and which I think it's really important to also, you know, even touch onto this idea of like, you know, the possibilities of the digital realm, because it like broadens our agency of knowing how much more that we can actually reach and how we can actually like move with certain ideas, is to really think about, you know, energy. You have energy that's embodied, you have energy that's disembodied, and then you have energy that's, because like, just to give like a quick thing about like the Nkisi, like Nkisi would be, or like even like if you think about the African mouse or all these sacred objects, a lot of times it's also this idea that like they are still waiting on bodies. So it would just be like if you would have like a reincarnated spirit or energy or consciousness that would wait, because sometimes also you had this like, you know, if you think about this like really big, you know, spirits or high priestesses or high priests that want to reincarnate, they're not just going to reincarnate in anybody. So they would just like, you know, wait around, sit around like in a Nkisi or in a mosque or in, you know, so just waiting around till the moment that like the perfect body would actually be born, and then they would just like slip into and like be reincarnated. So it's also this idea, I think, which maybe makes this interesting place of like the digital world, because I'm sure also with Gabber Modus, like all my work and like, you know, everything that I've done has always been only been possible through the internet, because obviously that's been like my connection to even like reach out, or like, you know, even when we did none and stuff. So it's always been this idea of like, you know, I really don't think that I would be who I am without the internet. So it's also this idea of like, okay, how to actually turn this digital space in our, you know, good for us, and also to kind of like, again, in this idea of like world building and building something outside of, you know, instead of like trying to get a seat at the table, or instead of like trying to decolonize everyone, or just like, you know, you can stay with your colonized world and we create our own, which I think it's really, sometimes I feel like that's actually where we should start going towards, the refusal of not even wanting to deal with, you know, the colonized stuff. And yeah, maybe it's just like building a utopia, but you haven't started, like, you know, maybe that's like the next place and like the possibility. And then, you know, what would happen if like these consciousness or whatever energy that you're created is like reincarnated in a digital body, virtual place, and then how can we interact with that on the virtual level? Maybe also the reach, you know, being able to reach much more people instead of just locally the people around you. So it gives like different things to think about, I think.
Yeah, wow, there's a lot there. I think I would love to just pass it over to you folks, but yeah, definitely the idea about connecting and building a space that can reach everywhere at once sounds mythological and fantastic, but we live in that very practically when there's digital spaces, and you can totally create that from anywhere and build your own reality. Folks, I feel like you in the process of creating this project must have touched on these subjects. So Ishan and Kai, I don't know if you want to say a little more about, yeah, using digital spaces as like an access and a gateway.
Well, I think for the first, what we should be treat of this project, the project supposed to be fun. Whenever when we agree about like creating our mythology and use digital as our platform, we start fully thinking about like, oh yeah, we supposed to be make our own Pokemon. So that's the things, like, you know, like the idea of it, like it's supposed to be the idea of the fun can be delivered to another generation, maybe the younger generation, not just our own generation. So the translation of using the augmented reality itself, and as we use a perspective how this mythology can be educated as fun as possible, like the way you play in Pokemon.
Yeah.
I think that's and maybe guys have like another perspective of like how we can use this technology.
Yeah, I mean, of course,
even like in the creating of the music, it's
well, in the same times, like we live in Indonesia, where like maybe my grandma still think like the Instagram filter is black magic, you know, that kind of stuff. So the gap is like we cannot just make this. When we try to create this project, we try to make as accessible as we can, and in the same times to see there is a gap, there is a lot of gap that we need to fill, because let's say like outside the rhythm or melody, the culture itself is just a topic of government. Like if you know Indonesia. It's just like tourism, but like even the culture that people see is the stuff from magazine. You know, it's never really touched the base, the idea of what real people doing. And for us in Gabber Modus Operandi, we know that we have privilege to kind of tapping in the both side. We measure the gap and we try to make as fun as possible. And then one of the things that the parameter to make it fun is like if people dance to it, like it needs to be danceable, you know, like at least in some sense. And it's you know, like that kind of a moment that you just dance like, what is this? This is so fun, you know. That kind of like it needs to go to reduce to that kind of levels, you know, rather than to attract the head nodding people like, I get it. This is like a plus the micro tuning, you know, like
Yeah.
we can, but we're gonna be replicating the other project that happens, I think.
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, I think Ichan touched on this before about like it's things for kids, but then also, yeah, like Kaz, as you were saying, it's got to be like accessing like that childlike state, because your music is so euphoric, and I think a lot of people might mistake it for like a club space being not okay for kids. For sure, that's fair enough. And also thinking that like something that is hard or like scary is not right for children. But in actual fact, when you see kids love things that are hyper intense, really euphoric. They get to run and dance around, and scary masks, kids love it. And I think also that you're making these head nodders access that childlike space. It's like a through passage, right? And that's where I think the tension between the two of you is also really interesting, because I don't want to sort of delineate you both as like one is one and one is the other, because actually you both have this like this lightheartedness and humor to you. But you know, folks, so Gabber Modus Operandi, your like stage show is like really, it is fun, like it's so raucous and it's so like bawdy. And I think the element of like humor here that plays against some of the sort of like scholarly stuff, the things that both of you folks are battling with. One of the questions I actually put up to ask you is, can irreverence be devotional?
What is that? What
like,
is simple?
Disrespect, not disrespect, but can like humor be devotional?
What is devotional?
Meyakinkan.
Pertanyaannya meyakinkan ya?
Humor tuh bisa meyakinkan nggak? Bisa bikin orang percaya nggak?
Oh, can.
Yeah.
Of course, like yeah. Like since our, let's say, our social media, we always wrapping it with that we don't want to as a humor, of course. We don't want to people catch us as a humor.
Well, at least the base, like here's the thing, like I'm gonna connect it with of course it can, and then I'm connecting to the idea of meme, let's say. I think like 3-4 years ago, suddenly the internet going like meta meme, and then people is like making memes as weird as possible. And in the same time, we know it's still like Western idea of meta. Have you guys checked the Indian memes? If you go to like Filipinos meme, it's like it's also weird in so many ways. It's just like the references of humor or the base to laugh at. It's really different.
Also, it's just the safe way to say it, like politically, when your country wasn't safe to say it politic.
Yeah.
And that's kind of space, what we said like humor, and we agree as humor. And this is kind of like the safe space to talk about like how your political stand for.
And as I would just stand as an Indonesian in the Javanese bloodline. If you see the set of shadow puppet, it has everything. It's gonna have humor in the beginning. The long set of shadow puppets gonna open with the humor, and then fight scene, and then the monster will come, and then humor again. Even one of the most famous one called Semar, which is this guy like ultra powerful, kind of like Mr. Manhattan, that super powerful, but one of his power is he can turn into pretty girls. So that's kind of like what we grow up with. Like there is a monster that have like 10 faces. Even like in Sumatra, I'm connecting with the idea of how you trans and become tiger. In West Sumatra, uh, I remember my father told me, because I also grew up near to West Sumatra, what they call for the tiger, it's grandma.
Wow.
It's weirdly between humor or respecting one of the best creatures in the world. So it's like, this is what we grow up with. This is how like the story, and then so I don't know, like so when we create music or doing performance or having thoughts, it's kind of like bringing all this. Maybe it's a bit absurd or doesn't make sense, or somehow make it less serious because you don't, But I think, I mean, one of the things, like, go check the Indonesian black metal, which is like, it's huge. Black metal in Indonesia is huge, and it's really fun. It's mixed between weird humor and then what scary.
Yeah, it's mixing everything. So
gore.
I mean, the humor itself, what we doesn't put as a project as a humor, but like we use this as a as a as an element satirical also.
Yeah.
To delivering our political thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. I mean, like, humor is as a safe space to talk about it.
Both as a safe space and a system you can use to like critique things or put forward a point of view. Definitely.
Yep.
I think unfortunately this time has gone so fast. I think we're slightly coming up to time. I think what would be nice if we start to open it up to a bit of a Q&A. There's a question that's come in on the chat, and then maybe we can also do some clips of the work and preview it before we have to say our goodbyes. So one question that's come in, I'm going to open floor this and just say that anybody jump in, is from Oriol Majumdar. So saying, I love the coexistence of the spiritual, cultural, imaginative, and technological. How much courage or boldness does it take to stay at that meeting point? Big question.
What's the question again?
So she says that she loves the coexistence of the spiritual, the cultural, the imaginative, and the technological. And how much courage or boldness does it take to stay at that meeting point? So do you find, like, where do you find the boldness and the drive to stay sitting in that meeting section between spiritual, cultural, imaginative, and technological?
Berapa yakin?
I think for me, I'll just say quickly, I think for me, I would say that it's kind of, again, this idea of like putting these things separate when they're all actually together. And I think for me, that has been something that I've realized that obviously through my own initiation and through my own tradition, that, you know, science and technology has always been very big, connecting to this religion, like I guess I wouldn't even say religious, like spiritual way of connecting to the higher dimensions, and like the quest, and I can only speak from my tradition, the quest of, you know, even whatever technology rhythm is, because it is an ancestral technology, that the quest for diving into that and being more complex, and, you know, that it always came from like a search of oneself and a search of like connecting to higher dimensions. So I think, yeah, I think for me personally, I feel like these things are not separate. So for me, diving more into my own spirituality and my own initiation in my heritage has given me the power to just basically understand that like this technology is just there actually. And now for me, it's just more about how I kind of tune into the technology that's already there. And that's been very interesting that it's not really separate actually, but then it just like kind of transforms. That's why it's always so amazing to see the connection between maybe like new ways of like thinking about sound. If you think about like, you know, 3D sound and like, and then actually like diving into some really weird ancient technological stuff, and then you're just like, whoa, they were using, you know, ancient Egypt, they were using like different frequencies, sound vibrating frequencies to levitate stones, and you know, tuning forks and whatever. And then it's just like, wow, we're actually coming to the place now where like this idea of like directional sound and like, you know, having sound move in certain patterns. Yeah, we're actually just coming to this point where this actually is meeting together, you know.
Yeah, I think it's a completely astute point to say that. I mean, yeah, in this question we've got the spiritual like the spiritual is the technological, as you're saying. So there's that intersection there in what you've been looking at. But then also the spiritual is necessarily the cultural. It's also necessarily the imaginative, and the cultural is also the technological. So it's this big. It's all. If it was a coin,
also the paradigm. Yeah,
yeah,
totally. But then it also becomes a paradigm, and that's why for me it always again becomes difficult to explain certain things, because you know, explaining one paradigm in another, it just kind of always gives this like friction. So then it also is just like, for me personally, a lot of the work, or like even how I think about the music, it's just the music gives an opportunity for me to actually not have to explain anything. So actually I feel like in the future I won't even talk anymore, you know, because it's really, you really get into more into this like other paradigm, and then you're just like, whoa, I have to explain things in words now, and it just doesn't work at all, you know. And then you listen to the music, and then people listen to the music, and then like what Gabber Modus says, like, you know, people start dancing a certain way, they start making spirals with their bodies, and then you're like, whoa, okay, we didn't explain anything, but they understand that this rhythm is like to spiral or whatever, you know. So it's this thing where like the body just like starts, you know, moving in a certain way, and like this idea of like the collective ritual, that's like where everything kind of materializes.
On the note that it's important to like experience it to understand it, can we see, I think now is a good time to see if we can actually see some of a sneak preview of some of this work, because we can talk about the ideas and the theory, but I guess seeing it in practice is the nicest thing. I don't know who we had on the Zoom who was going to do a screen share of some of the
or I can just like showing like the way we did with the ER project, like since like us with Malika, like sharing the audio and sharing the idea, and we compose the kind of music, and we present it as like how these technologies and mythical can be presented in the fun way. That we said like in here, it's the graphic itself. If you can see all the audience in here, the graphic itself, it's the trigger is all is a composing of the gamelan, the sound source. This is the graphic, and then you can see if we scan the graphic, it's producing the magic. Yeah, that's it. Like this is the first composing of the gamelan, and then I scan, and it's producing the.
Oh wow! Oh my word! You might have to hold it a little bit further up the screen. I just saw a little snippet.
Exactly. There. So like you can see, it's like the object is a popping on the top of it, and with the sound. So the idea, it's there is one story coming from East Java when this old guy, like, he's a farmer digging his backyard to farming, and he found it this the heritage of old Majapahit era, his old kingdom, and like, of course he's excited because all these treasures coming from his backyard. Of course, as a people right now, they videoing, they do the video, and they take the video of the artifact. What happened is when they showing the video to the neighborhood, it's suddenly the sounds coming. Even like when he found it, like, it doesn't have like a sound. When he videoing, like suddenly like gamelan coming through his video, and everyone shocked because like he even is shocked himself because like what's going on, like, you know, like suddenly the sounds coming when he do the video. So that's the idea of like, for us it's like, whoa, this could be like applicating on this project, because like for us is technology, it's the tools of you being relevant through your culture.
And also to add, we have like some discussion that I think we missed to talk about, like the idea that we make a totem is because I remember Malika, like, oh, the Nkisi mask, the original, is actually captive in some museum in the box, right? And I proposed the idea where the dots in the gamelan, the dots is actually where one of the basic gamelan ensemble, and each of the dots is basically produce sound, right? And when I confirmed with Malika the seventh rhythm, and we found out that both of our ancestors don't really make music inside the room. So we don't have the amplification of sound. So the sounds need to be really loud and not centralized to one directional. So like only now the modern gamelan or modern like African drumming, Congo's drumming, let's say like doing in the stage. But back then it was supposed to be like in the center. That's why like because of this, and this is really interesting topic to talk, like how we perceive sounds to get trends. Because back then, what I know is like we don't have the idea of amplification of like a 6.1 channel or like surround system, and we don't even have reverb. At least in Indonesia, we play outside, so you need to make loudest sound as possible, and that's kind of like we kind of like to translate it into the idea of a room when it has this wall and reflection, and then where the sounds come from. It's kind of like giving us idea. Oh, let's say make the things in the center. So let's say we kind of rotate around that sound. So the sound is kind of spreading. So next one, we still gonna work on like how we produce each of the notes of the gamelan. Gonna go through all of this simulation, but still in the center. So people gonna like wandering, and then the rhythm of Malika gonna be around it.
Wow!
And that's still in develop. Like we still like, but yeah, the point is it's so interesting also to what do you call it, to surgical to dissect the idea of a culture, and then like how the sounds come from. Like back then, like I got the story from my old man, and like no, it's just so loud that you need to get closer. So if you're not closer to the ensemble, then you don't hear anything, and that's even happens until like 70s in Indonesia, because the idea of like all this amphitheater or like stages or opera house, we don't have it, that kind of stuff, and it's really interesting point also.
Yeah. Malika. Oh, sorry, you look like you.
Yeah, no, I was just nodding. No, totally.
Oh, okay.
Like, no, I think it's really important again to, you know, to just like continue with what Kas said, to just like also understand that a lot of things we take for granted, that those things are kind of again conditioned things, you know. So then, like, I remember like I was also thinking about these things, and then it's just like, you know, even how our ears are directed, you know, our ears are not directed to receive sound like that, you know, our ears are going this way. So it's all this thing of just like, you know, again, this thing of like, you know, the sound is actually directed to the eyes, you know, like we again are in this like way to like, you know, put the visual actually above like the sonic. And then maybe like the traditions where we come, or like that we connect with, that they are much more about this like materializing, you know, and more about this idea of like, you know, the sound is just there. But then again, you know, the sound waves fly and then you don't know where they reach. So it's also this idea again, that's probably also like more colonial context of just like trying to, you know, put everything in something. And then like what happens when certain rhythms go, you know, like go, the sound waves go and then they get materialized something somewhere else. It's just beautiful to think more about this idea that like, you know, like certainly in this world we live in where things kind of needs to be put in boxes and materialized, and definitely in music, you know, ideas of genre, ideas of like musical cultures, and how, you know, it becomes like a discovery when you manage to kind of smash cultures together or like musical traditions. But then it's like, you know, that's always been the way how, you know, new methods and new ways of thinking about music have kind of existed, you know. So I think it's always like very interesting to think more about how to actually break those borders, like what is music, what is not music anymore, you know, like, you know, this idea of just like, you know, are you the one making music, is your body the one making music, or is, you know, so it's also this thing of just like, how can we step away from these from these like borders, and then to then just like this, have this beautiful little totem twirling, you know, like that's just like the materialization outside of like the musical composition is just really nice, because it again like it's just like, you know, what is, you know, what is real and what's not, what is, you know, what is music, what is visual, what is, you know, what is spiritual, what is technology, you know, to really just question marks, you know, because I think it's always better to start from there than to, and I think from both sides, I think we didn't really want to come here, and that's why the fun part came in, and just be like, look what we found, you know, we have all this thing, but it's just more like, oh well, those are things we think about, and then we see what, you know, what the audience or like people taking the music, taking everything, like how they kind of interact with that, and maybe they get even better ideas, you know. So I think that's the beauty of like this other way of like connecting with knowledge and with knowledge systems, because they're obviously always above us, you know.
Yeah, using it as a way to break down and question like every single part is really, it was kind of fun, the context in which you said like thinking outside of the box, which is of course like when we're looking at thinking about people playing outside, quite literally, like a lot of Western musical culture was obsessed with quite literally putting things in a box, in that it all came from chamber music being played with reverb. And then it sounds to me like the way that you folks are describing the history you're drawing on, but also this specific experience that you pair have created together is about, if you want to hear it physically as sound waves, you need to be in the thick of it and not just hearing the reverb. You've got to quite literally be like next to it and not thinking about being in a box with reverb. So there's such a lovely duality to it there. I think we've just got a note through saying that we can actually see some of the totems that you've created. So can we, there we go. Let's do it. Let's have a little look.
Yeah, that's why like also we try to develop of this myth creature of the myth. Why I put the ice more, like it's a five, the ice is symbol of the melody, and the legs is symbol of the rhythm. It's 7 with 5 eyes kind of things. Okay. And the ice is symbol. The ice is gonna moving. It's still developing, of course, because it's dancing with the ice. They call like somehow when they dance they use like the ice is like moving around. Yeah,
I cannot do that.
Yeah, exactly. Because, Yeah, so the idea is also like we call it nyeredet in Bali. It's mean like when the eyes is also moving and following the rhythm.
Okay. I mean, that's a classic thing of like induced trance, right? Is like the eyes rolling is like a sort of key like physical marker of people often being in that sort of transcendent state. So it's really nice to see it like redigitized here. And it's funny because Nkisi, you just mentioned before about ears being directional, and about the way that you receive sound waves being actually directional. But I know that there's also ideas in other forms of like mystical thought that the eyes are also directional and that you can both look and receive. So thinking about pathways in all senses. But you chose, as a question, you chose in that one, the legs as the rhythm. Is that the movement? Not ears,
Yeah.
the legs. Okay, I love that.
You know, just like you know.
No, I think that's the thing again. It's just like, you know, obviously it's beautiful to be able to talk about all this. But again, it's this thing of just like, you know, what happens when you actually can. And obviously we're looking forward to be able to be back in this space, you know, or like I also dance by myself. But like, you know, also this idea of just like, you know, connecting to this other way and like connecting to our bodies and connecting to the dance and connected to the rhythm. Because I also like this, you also have this one thing about like, you know, how like what you said with the neurons, we also have this one concept they call like homeostasis, and it's also this idea of like, you know, when you walk with someone on the street, that you kind of like sync in the rhythm, or you know, like when and you kind of walk on the same rhythm. So it's also really interesting how that notion is also connected to like this idea of like feedback, you know, so like feedback cycles and like how, you know, the balance that happens, it's never, you know, it's always like what happens a bit more gets a little bit less. So it's always this idea of like, you know, our bodies are always trying to harmonize in like a weird way, you know.
Yeah.
And like you get the BPMs up, or like when you get the rhythms a bit trancy, like what can actually happen to our bodies, right?
Then what can happen to our bodies as a group as well. Yeah. Wow. I'm wondering if we're still running to time. We've gone a little bit over, but I've not had the heart to cut anybody off. Terrible moderator. I'm wondering if anybody has any more questions on the Facebook stream, please do pop them in the chat. There's been some links to research also posted up in there. So if you have anything you want to add last minute, please fire in. We'll leave a few moments for questions, but it's worth just running through again about where we can see this piece and when. So this work between Nkisi and Gabber Modus Operandi as part of No Bounds and a collaboration with Yes, No Wave is going to be premiered at No Bounds Festival 2021 that's coming in autumn. I believe there's still a few tickets left, maybe a small handful. So, you know, in classic promoter talk, act quick, don't sleep. Go buy a ticket if you want to see this work being premiered. I can't wait. I'm really, really excited to see this. Any more on questions? And also going to be coming out as a release on Yes No Wave Music as well. What I'll do is I'll probably pop a link in the Facebook chat to that. A free release. Yay! So that you can save it and find it and go and listen to it and enjoy it and dance to it. I want to.
Yeah, and become a tiger.
No.
Dance it, listen it. Maybe
what kind of animal?
What kind of animal you can present it on Nobon? Maybe you coming from Alaska, you polar bear. Maybe you from Russia, you should presenting your transcendental animal. Maybe
if I'm coming from
maybe I don't know, from German, maybe snail. I don't know, maybe I only see snail in German.
That's really? Animal. Europe don't have animal that much. That's why. That's the problem with Europe.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't really have much animals. So
until colonials
you drugs. You cannot turn into tiger, man. No.
A squirrel?
It's what interesting, like all the continents, like when we perform, it's just like presenting your animal.
That's the next stage. Like we should make a map of how people trans and become what. That's kind of interesting also to see.
It could be like is any
no, there is not.
Okay,
Let's ask the
maybe when it is released, you listen to our tracks and taking reference of like what animals can be presenting from the tracks.
Mm-hmm.
That's your homework, everyone.
I love
no, because it's because that's the last conversation I have with one of the guy that regularly get trans from West Java and he trans every weekend and they do this kind of type of and I was asking him like why you always become tiger and because it's close to us and sadly the tiger was like disappear now, you know, the overdevelopment stuff like that, but the idea of trans is part of this submissive idea that really grounded to the place that he lives on. It's really, really interesting for us to hear, you know. It's like a really high level awareness. It's like a time, it's really not bound in time and the way they dance also. It's just like it's out of the restriction of how being sexy or proper or elegant or like rave or whatever. It's like it's so good to the point that we're really jealous. Like how? Like what kind of substance or? But no, it's like
it's I mean like of course like this in the Nobons, like when we present it, get close to us, like you can see, like you know, can see the vibration, you can feel the vibration. Presenting your animal. That's if it's gonna happen anyway.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually because in the Congo tradition, in trance you transform in your totem animal because everyone. So in Congo tradition, so every person has like a specific totem. So I have my totem, and then when I get into trance, I transform into my totem. So then a lot of like the spiritual work is like, how can you first meet your totem? So that's like when you get into your first trance, and then you meet them, and then when you one of my totems say like I'm like a lion. So then it's like, you know, when I get into trance and I become the lion, but then it's just like, you know, it's so nice because then it's also in Congo tradition, you can connect to your personal totem, but then you can also connect to like the totem of like your tradition, which then for us is like the leopard. So you can connect to the leopard, and then you can connect to like other totems. And then you can take like, when you get into trance, you can like communicate with them. And then you can also get like your power from them for if you go through like, so basically it's your best friend. So it's just like, oh, I have a problem. Just like, hey, you know.
like that's why we're jealous of Africa. You have so many things that you can be transformed to, you know. Imagine if you are in Galapagos and then the music and then you transfer to like the most amazing pictures ever, which is like, that's interesting, right? I mean,
but I think again, and that's like why I think it's like so important to connect to the music, because I think you really start to realize that it's like, you know, all this, and that is said with also like this idea of like modernity and people kind of like stepping away from tradition because people want to be modern and like have like an iPhone and stuff. But then it also becomes interesting that like, you know, maybe that's like the job of also like the new generation to kind of try to figure out what are the rhythms, because they're actually just formulas. So it's like you have like one rhythm to be able to connect to your totem. And then what would happen, like, you know, like Ichan was saying, like if we play the music like a specific rhythm or a specific melody, and then every single person in the room turns into their totem, you know. I think people would not let us play again. They would just be like, this project is over. Can you imagine if everyone just starts, because that's also like the thing of like, people transforming their totem animal, but then, and that's like the beauty of like the shaman, I guess, and like having this like musical position of the shaman, and the person was like, leading the people in it, because then it's like, you need to also bring them back, because it already happened to people that they kind of get into trance, they become like a rhino, and then they're just out in the streets, being a rhino, and then,
become a rhino. That's what that's you writing, man.
Yeah, you can find a path, but you've got to find the way back. I think
need the way back.
Yeah. So which one of you is leading us back again?
I think we all have to do it together. If we get people to get into the trance, you have to have the it's always going to be the music, right? It's like the music who brings it back, and then and then people can get back, and then it's like, what did you learn inside of your trance, right? Because it's always a way to kind of get information out of it.
I mean, this is a huge introduction, because I've actually just got a little notice through to say that we're ready to play some of the clips of the music. So if any of the rhino sat at their computer, apologies,
let's the rhino.
Bring you back.
Back again to the point of space. There is no really like back then or still now in the so many places outskirts of a main city, like people still doing like outdoor. So I think like the reason why it not becomes
plantation,
it's just like no, it's just still. It's pretty still.
It's boring, I mean, like, why you become a cactus like this? No, then say.
I don't know, like
you can be some coconut.
In Congo
coconut is maybe
because in Congo tradition is because it's because like what they call the reptilian brain, that's supposedly like our connection with the animal world, and then like how it's connected to the pineal gland. That's like how you can connect, because even if you, which is really interesting, because then it's also this idea that like a lot of times it's really complicated. It's like even if you look at like the deities and the gods and stuff, it's never this idea, you go more and more dimensions up, and then like the more that the gods and deities are like connected to like human form, and they're like human, the lower that they are. So those are gods, they are like in 4th dimension, 5th dimension, 6th dimension. But when you start going more up, then the Jennies, they're like in animal forms. So it's also this idea of like actually like in Congo tradition, the higher the spiritual beings and entities, they're all in animal forms. But then the connection of like the fact that we could totally transform, like in trance, that I could become like a rhino, is because of the fact that I still have a little bit of the animal brain in my brain. And then that's like, that one gets like triggered, connecting to the pineal gland, that then connects to the higher dimensions.
Okay.
Very complicated.
Wow. No, that's two like very, very different answers. That's so interesting. And I think also to maybe throw something more confusing into the mix, it's like, so and then you're talking about it being like slow, like it's so still. It's this idea that maybe it's the time of the totem, if you were a plant or a tree, is moving so differently. And I know that both of you have touched before in your separate projects about temporal things. Maybe there is a plant totem, but it's so slow that we're just not seeing it right now. I know that Nkisi, you've spoken about non-linear time and the past being actually just an extension of the present before. And the reason I picked this out for you folks, Gabber Modus Operandi, is that someone left a YouTube comment on one of your videos, and it says, "This is well good. I feel like this tune is the past, the present, and the future all in one." And in that, I saw the parallels between your work that I just thought was really neat and fun. I think we're just about running out of time. I think we can stay on the phone talking about this all day. It's been absolutely delightful. I'm just going to bring Walk in now from Yes No Wave, who's going to wrap things up for us. So I might be signing out here and just saying thank you so much. Huge shout out to No Bounds and to Yes No Wave. This has been an absolute treat.
Thank you.
Walk, I'm going to give the floor to you now.
Thank you, Lupin. Until we meet you offline.
All right, thank you, Melika, Gabber Modus Operandi, and especially Nina for your time to help us, to bring us all together through this talk. And thank you for everyone who has been waiting for our days and has been here with us for 90 minutes, I think. And I really appreciate your time for joining us. So yeah, as Nina said before, following this project, Gabber Modus Operandi and Nkisi's collaborative works will be released, both visuals and audio tracks, where the visual will be released, I think, on Instagram, and the tracks will be released on yesnowave.com for free download on the 30th of June. And then hopefully we can meet up IRL at No Bones Festival in September to see the whole
October.
October.
October the 15th and the 17th.
Okay, sorry. Okay, everyone. I don't have anything much to say. Just please keep in the loop on our socials, No Bones Festival UK, and Yes No Wave on Instagram and on Facebook. So have a good night. Have a good weekend. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.